The diesel engines in the BMW 3 Series F30 are very economical, and most of them are also powerful enough. So they are really great and awesome until the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse arrive. I'm talking about the 4 scariest failures related to the fuel system, timing chain, EGR system and crankshaft bearings. To be fair, I'm not saying that you will experience all of these issues. There are obviously exceptions and various variables. But if they do arrive, then they are gonna make a spectacular show you will never forget. So let's start from the beginning. All of these engines are equipped with the infamous Bosch CP4 high-pressure fuel pump, which can suddenly fail and release tiny metal particles into the whole fuel system, and this is gonna destroy all the injectors. But this issue is not extremely common, and it happens usually just in the eastern part of Europe and in the US because of the different quality of the fuel. Then there are the injectors, which are not gonna last forever either. Usually you only get the classic faulty injector symptoms. But in the worst case, so not that often, the faulty injector can melt the piston or crack it. Especially cars with performance upgrades can more often end up with this kind of a damage. By the way, a faulty injector can also cause a louder rattling noise like this. Next there is the timing chain. All of these engines are equipped with a timing chain which can fail. In the older N-series engines, the chain can not only get worn and jump, possibly causing bigger or smaller engine damage, but it can also suddenly snap and definitely cause an engine damage. In the 4-cylinder N47 engines made to 2013, it is possible that the timing chain will be more worn even at around 150,000 kilometers. But in the 6-cylinder N57 engines, usually just at around 200,000 kilometers. On the other side, in the newer B-series diesel engines, the chain is not known for snapping or premature failure. A worn timing chain can make a noticeable rattling noise at engine start like this. But in many cases it won't make any noise, and that's why it's good to replace it preventively. Now let's move on to the EGR system, which can have two main issues. The EGR valve can fail and the EGR cooler can leak internally. Now, a faulty or stuck EGR valve will cause various symptoms, but none of these symptoms are gonna destroy your car. On the other side, the EGR cooler can start to leak coolant internally, and this can contribute to a fire, which will destroy your car completely. An early symptom of a leaking EGR cooler is disappearing coolant without any external leaks, so check your coolant level regularly. Then, another thing you should check is the VIN number of your car. Put it into the official BMW website or call the dealer to find out if your car is in the newest EGR cooler recall database, since there is still an ongoing recall for this problem. And you should look into this recall even if they already replaced the EGR cooler on your car in the past, since in 2022 they introduced this newest updated EGR cooler. So if your car still has the old style EGR cooler and if it's on the list, then you will get a new latest EGR cooler for free. But for more information about this problem, visit my website. The last main problem of these engines is related to the crankshaft bearings. There are numerous cases of worn main bearings and occasionally rod bearings in these diesel engines. The bearings can also spun, causing a big engine damage. But before you start to panic, I have to add that most of the documented cases are from the N57 6-cylinder engines. The 4-cylinder N47 engines can have worn bearings too, but less often. To top of that, it's good to know that before 200,000 kilometers, this failure is very, very rare. After 200,000 kilometers, the chance of this failure gets bigger, and after 300,000 kilometers it gets very high. On the other side, I have to add that there are also engines with 300,000 kilometers or even 400,000 kilometers which still have the factory bearings. So there are certain variables which can contribute to this issue, which means that not all of these engines are gonna end up with prematurely worn or failed bearings. But either way, there is a pretty high chance that at 200,000 kilometers, mainly the main bearings are gonna be more or less worn, to some extent. So at this mileage point you should consider replacing the main and also the rod bearings preventively, because when you get a knocking noise from the engine like this, then it's already too late. By the way, if it is possible, then before buying you should remove the oil filter and inspect it for metallic chips, which is the early sign of worn crankshaft bearings. These were the main problems of the diesel engines, but there are also the other generic issues they can have. So, the crank pulley on the front of the engine can crack and disintegrate, so check it. All these engines have a plastic coolant flange mounted on the side, which will eventually crack and leak coolant. The sphere flaps in the intake manifold are gonna clog up with carbon soot. Eventually they get stuck. Every 100,000 kilometers or 150,000 kilometers you should check and eventually clean the whole intake from carbon soot. Then, excessive oil consumption can appear in all these engines, rarely even after 100,000 kilometers, but more likely after 150,000 kilometers or 200,000 kilometers. However, this is not extremely common, and mainly engines with longer oil change intervals are more prone to this. Be ready that after 200,000, 250,000 kilometers, the turbocharger will be more or less worn out. This is not that surprising, but some of these engines have two turbochargers, which is gonna increase the repair cost. And lastly, there are numerous cases of fuel in the engine wiring harness. This can cause various symptoms and later a permanently damaged ECU, since the fuel will eventually leak into it. So occasionally, check the various connectors on the engine for traces of fuel and consider replacing this specific fuel feed line, which is connected to the high pressure fuel pump. There is a fuel sensor which is part of this line, and this sensor can more often leak fuel internally into the engine wiring harness.